Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of Black Marriage Therapy, BMT for short. Here we become students of marriage in order to create healthy, long-lasting relationships. I'm your host, Kristen Smith, and in today's episode, we discuss conflict. I used to think that my husband could not handle confrontational, emotional conversations. When we would have serious disagreements, he seemed to retreat internally and offer shallow explanations of how he was feeling. It wasn't always like this, but something shifted in our relationship. In the past, he did most of the talking during disputes, and I did most of the shutting down. As I began to come more into myself, I began to speak up more and offer my true emotions and opinions. As time has gone on, we somehow switched positions. He became quieter and I was the one dominating most of the conversation. I did not want to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Something was off about our communication, but I decided to keep telling myself the same story that I wanted to believe was true. He just didn't know how to handle me speaking up for myself, making my arguments, and not backing down when he had opposing views. Our relationship was still in good standing despite those conflict run-ins, but that nagging feeling of a slow drift apart emotionally led me to reevaluate the interactions we were having. What I found is that my husband didn't have a problem handling confrontational emotional conflicts, but that my approach to these conflicts was affecting his ability to safely communicate his displeasure with me. In a relationship, you will have disagreements, miscommunications, squabbles, arguments, and other various forms of disputes. However, a relationship in constant marital conflict is often walking down a path that leads to marital dissatisfaction and divorce. Conflict in itself is not the issue. Instead, it is our response to conflict that dramatically or subtly affects our relationship. This is something that I have decided to intentionally work on this year. In a previous episode, I touched on conflict resolution, but I wanted to give this topic its own spotlight. In this episode, I hope to give you new insight into conflict and its meaning, why conflict resolution/management is significant in relationships, and how to resolve issues and come back into realignment as a couple. Before we jump into the main topic of this episode, first and foremost, Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you guys for an amazing year, and I am so excited to start Season 2 of Black Marriage Therapy. Quick housekeeping. 1, the new episode schedule will continue as usual. So it's not a new episode schedule. Actually, it's the same schedule. The podcast will be coming out twice a month on Thursdays. But if you are looking for more content in between that time, and if you have been enjoying the podcast, please follow us on Instagram at Black Marriage Therapy. Also, exciting news, I have been approved for the Spotify ad program, so you may begin to hear ads from here on out. However, I plan to place them in appropriate times so they do not affect the flow of the podcast. But shout out to your girl because she got approved for the Spotify ad program. So today we are giving conflict its own spotlight. This is something that is often discussed when it comes to relationships. You may hear it from different podcasters or YouTubers or therapists. Conflict resolution. Why is it so important? And it is really important. Conflict resolution is one of those things that if as a couple you can do it really well, it benefits your marital satisfaction. But couples that can't really do conflict resolution have a lot of trouble. So I did some research and trying to understand conflict a little bit more. So like I do in many other episodes, I want to start with the definition of conflict. So conflict in the Merriam-Webster dictionary has 3 main definitions. And I think all of them are necessary. So I'm going to share them with you. The first definition is simple: fight, battle, war. That's the first definition in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. The second one is competitive or opposing action of incompatibilities. Lord help me. And the third one is mental struggle resulting from incompatible or opposing needs, drives, wishes, or external or internal demands. So what I took from these definitions: conflict, unlike other forms of dispute in a relationship, is about disunity or unalignment, some form of antagonism, right? It's about two people coming against each other, a fight, a battle, a war. So understanding conflict from that perspective, from the definition of disunity or misalignment, gives us greater understanding of what conflict resolution really is. Conflict resolution is not necessarily about fixing the problem, but two people resolving to be reunified. One of the leading researchers on marriage and relationships, John Gottman, his research showed that 69% of conflicts are ongoing or do not have a solution. So what does that mean for our relationships? Are we doomed to be unhappy 69% of the time because we cannot resolve our conflicts? No. What it means is that when you can solve a conflict, solve it. But if you cannot, let it go and decide to stay in unity with your partner. This is easier said than done for sure, because you get in the heat of the moment and you guys are arguing, things like that. But sometimes you have to look at it from the bigger perspective. Some things are just fundamentally different because you are two individuals who are different. They do it that way, you do it that way. And it doesn't mean that both of you guys are wrong. It just means that you guys are different. So when it comes to conflict resolution, you are making a decision sometimes, not all the times, because sometimes you can solve the issue, but in other times, you're just making a decision to come back into alignment and not fight against each other or battle against each other. Now, the reason why the therapists and the counselors and the pastors and all these people are always talking about conflict resolution is because the people that can't get past the conflict and decide instead to stay misaligned drives a wedge in the relationship. It also decreases the marital satisfaction and leads eventually to divorce. Because instead of making an intentional decision to come back together with your spouse and become unified and aligned, you are deciding to separate and continue to fight and battle your spouse. As I mentioned before, this is something that I have made a resolution for the new year. I want to work on conflict resolution, how I go about it, and all these different things so that we can have better communication in our relationship and ultimately be more satisfied in our marriage. So I have a story of this whole conflict thing. I had to write it down because my mind was like, I really need to remember exactly what I'm trying to say. But I want to share with you guys the stories to kind of show my experience with conflict and conflict resolution. I remember a time where Junior was trying to express himself to me. He was trying to tell me something, and I just kept defending myself as to why I wasn't wrong or why he should see it my way. We just kept at it. And I saw him kind of slowly dwindle down to quietness. I guess I had spoken up enough where he was just like, you know what, I'm done talking. And in my mind, I'm thinking why is he so upset? I feel like I have a right to share my side of the story. This is basically how we were kind of dealing with our conflicts. And it happens many times after that until it kind of dawned on me that I was the problem. And maybe it didn't dawn on me. Maybe we had enough fights where I'm like, all right, hold on, something ain't working. We got to pause and think about this, right? So, we were having a conflict or whatever. And after that situation, I had to ask myself one time after we got into it, I asked myself, do I believe him? Do I believe Junior? What he's saying, how he feels, needs, wants, desires, all those things. Do I believe him? And when I asked myself the question, the answer was no. And to be honest, I was shocked because I was like, no, I love this person. Of course I believe him and all that stuff. I would say that, but my actions were not showing that. So my follow-up question to myself was, well, should I believe him? And of course it was like, yes, I should believe him. He's a human being. I love him. What he is saying is true to his experience. So I should believe him. So this situation is what really changed how I was looking at resolving conflict. I saw it as something that had to be solved every single time, and it didn't. There was a time and a place, and in these cases, I just needed to believe he felt the way he felt and take the necessary action to address how he felt. The end, period, point blank. This brought us back into unity and back on the path to fighting another day, pun intended. So after kind of like having this conversation with myself and reevaluating the way we were dealing with conflict, I decided this year to actually write down marriage goals and what I want to our marriage to look like after this year. And my top 3 marriage goals were all around conflict resolution. And I'm gonna share them with you. They are: I accept when I'm wrong more often. I believe before I defend. I do not blame. And Gottman has a quote that I feel like just sums this baby up. It says, admit when you're wrong, shut up when you're right. So those 3 goals are, well, it's 3 out of 7. I have some other goals, but those 3 goals are like top priority for me because I'm realizing that if I don't reevaluate the way we're doing conflict resolution, and I'm speaking for myself, Junior maybe have a different experience, I feel like we're going to kind of become emotionally distant, and that's not what I want from our marriage. So this year I'm intentionally trying to work towards better conflict resolution, which truly entails me believing my husband and allowing him the room to feel the way he has to feel, and understanding that just because he feels that way does not mean that I am wrong. And it doesn't mean that he's blaming me. And it doesn't mean that he's attacking me in some way. It just means that that's how he feels. So if I'm going back to what we talked about as far as the definition, I was seeing Junior as the enemy. I was saying, well, he has the problem. He doesn't like when I speak up. He doesn't like when I speak my mind, all these things. I'm attacking, and he's just shutting down because he doesn't really want to deal with it. But now when I see it in this new perspective, if I'm thinking about conflict as I want to be able to be reunified with my husband. If this is a conversation, if this is something that we need to solve, then I need to go about it in a better approach so that we can solve the issue. But if it's something that's just fundamentally different, and in most cases recently, it was just things that he felt. These were things that he was experiencing. And in that case, I don't need to battle my way to try to change the way he feels. No, I'm just going to intentionally make a decision to, apologize if I need to apologize, and just come back into unity with my husband and keep it moving. But let's be honest, this is difficult for me. It still is difficult for me. Like, just because I have a better understanding of conflict resolution does not mean that it's all hunky-dory and now I know what to do. It feels unnatural to me, like make myself vulnerable enough to back down and just believe what he is saying. It makes me feel like, well, if I don't get my point across, then that means that, I'm just going to be diminished and he's going to walk all over me and things like that. But that's not the truth. If I continue to believe that, then it will be the truth for me, but it's not the truth for the actual situation. I decided that I don't have to have all the details and specifics to choose to understand and believe my husband. I don't have to logically make sense of the situation to believe that he is hurt or upset or displeased with me. My fear was that if I believed him, then I was the bad guy, and I didn't want to be the bad guy. My need to be perceived as good dismissed his need to be believed. Because I no longer wanted to hurt my husband in that way and wanted to see the vision we have for our marriage come to fruition, I decided to make a change. All right, so let's recap because I felt like I said a lot of stuff. 1, conflict is misalignment, disunity, or an antagonistic attitude towards one another in a relationship. 2, it is important in marriage to practice conflict resolution slash management, because ignoring conflict or exacerbating conflict can drive a subtle emotional wedge between you and your spouse that will eventually, okay, lead to divorce. Number 3, most conflicts in marriage don't have solutions, but that does not mean you have to be unhappy 69% of the time. So the last thing I want to talk about, because we've been talking about conflict resolution and all that stuff, but girl, how? You said a lot. You said you love your husband, you believe him, all that stuff, but girl, how, right? How, when you get hot, you get angry, you come out of alignment, how do you bring yourself back? We really and truly have to understand the heart of conflict. If your heart towards the way you feel and your attitude, like I said before, towards your spouse is antagonistic, like this is my enemy, like we're in a fight, we're in a battle, you are in conflict. Y'all not having a little squabble, a little disagreement, heated exchange. No, you guys are in conflict. And that is very dangerous. We have to learn, okay, because we're all in this marriage education, marriage school type of thing together on this marriage journey. We have to learn how to train our attitude, train our heart, and bring ourselves back into alignment with one another. How do we resolve conflict? So let's look at the data, because when I said that it lead to divorce, that wasn't conjecture. All right. That wasn't just guessing. Like, research shows that couples with poor conflict resolution and management have a higher rate of marital dissatisfaction and divorce than couples who practice positive or constructive conflict resolution slash management. Your girl wasn't lying to you, y'all. People actually wrote down the numbers on paper. Conflict resolution actually affects your relationship, how happy you are, and if your relationship succeeds. That's what data shows. So as I was researching conflict resolution and all those things, best tips, things like that, there's a lot of information out there to help you. Y'all know me here. I like things that are concrete and fact-based because I don't know, it just kind of helps me to ground myself to understand, somebody was actually trying to study this and see what helped couples. So I found something that I think is going to be very effective. And then I'm going to give my own personal tips based off my own experience. So there are 3 main responses to conflict. Remember in the beginning when I was talking about conflict, I was saying that sometimes conflict is not about the problem, but how you respond to it. And the research that I found was talking about the responses to conflict and how they affect how you can possibly resolve it or manage it. The 3 main responses, the first one was destructive behavior. So that's yelling, insults, criticism, belligerence, and contempt. Another response to conflict is constructive behavior. So that's being overtly positive, saying nice things, calmly discussing the problem, actively listening, things like that. The third response was withdrawal behaviors. This includes disengaging from the conflict or person and may include leaving the situation or keeping quiet. Now, I just gave you all those 3 responses. Really think about which one you fall in line to. When I was looking at the research and thinking about it, I knew immediately that my default is withdrawal. So just disengaging, shutting down, and just being like, leaving the situation, keeping quiet. And that is how I was for a majority of our relationship in the beginning. Now I feel like I'm moving into constructive. I know I'm a type of person that I can shut down while we having like constructive conflict sometimes because, I just be like withdrawing within to myself. So I cannot imagine like destructive response because, let me tell you something I cannot handle. That's yelling, insults, criticism, all the stuff that I listed. I'm like, bro, I cannot do that. I've been around it before. I do not like it. And it's just like an absolutely non-starter for our relationship. Sometimes if Junior gets heated or whatever, I'll tell him right after, I was like, listen, I understand you're upset, but I can't. No, we cannot do that. It's just not acceptable. So now that you understand those 3 versions of how you respond to conflict, here are some practical tips that I have to help you deal with conflict resolution. Now, get your pens, get your papers out, get your notes app or whatever you want to do. because this is a lot of information. I think it's good information, but specifically it requires reflection. It requires introspection. A lot of times handling situations and resolving issues in your relationship start with resolving issues with yourself. So the first tip I have is to evaluate your current conflict style. Ask yourself, what type of responses do I have based off those three? And you can also ask yourself specifically, did I leave this conversation feeling heard or more hurt than I came into it? Do I feel like my partner felt understood, respected, and valued? Was I kind? Was I blaming? Can I accept when I am wrong without giving an explanation? Is it destructive, constructive, or withdrawn? Take some time, ask yourself those questions, because having that foundation is going to help you to be more self-aware so that you're coming into the situation level-headed, understanding, okay, this is where I'm starting from. So if your answer was that my conflict response is destructive, number one, acknowledge it. You have to call a spade, be like, listen, we be yelling, we be fighting, we be cussing. It's not okay. Two, decide that you guys want something different. Listen, there's some people, they love the drama. They love the hype. They love it. You know what I'm saying? They thrive off it. But listen, that's not a healthy relationship. So if y'all don't decide that y'all want to do something different, then it's just going to keep being the same. Lastly, you have to sit down with your partner and set a new plan about how you guys are going to move from destructive to constructive conflict resolution. I don't want to take too much time here, so I'm going to put a specific website that's going to help you go through making conflict resolution more constructive for your relationship. The second thing, if your conflict response is constructive, you're doing great. Continue to walk the path and manage conflicts appropriately. Conflict resolution is often what's talked about, but after being married for this amount of time, I understand that sometimes it's conflict management. So these are doing things, it's preventative, right? We talk about preventative a lot in medicine. But there are things in your relationship that you can do that are preventative. These are things like check-ins and having conversations, maybe bringing it back up. Like, hey, we talked about this, 2 months ago. I wanted to check in with you. Like, we talked about trust. Is this something that's still, bothering you? How's the progress? Things like that. We do check-ins. And that's a way you can kind of manage the conflicts. Even though you're constructive, you feel like you're all Gucci, good, you can still work on it in that way. Another thing, if you're a person with constructive response to conflict, it's still important to stay attuned to drastic changes in your life that might affect your conflict resolution skills. Listen, let me tell you, your marriage will be tested. It's called life. And what happens is life just shakes up your relationship. And before you know it, you guys are fighting about things that you didn't fight about, all these different things, but if your response to conflict is still constructive, then it's something that you want to maintain and make sure that you guys are continuing down that path of constructive conflict resolution. Now, if you ask yourself those hard questions and you realize that your conflict resolution style is withdrawn, please be careful. Withdrawing for the sake of regrouping to address the situation more appropriately is okay. That's a good, healthy habit. But withdrawing emotionally, stonewalling, or shutting down is detrimental to any relationship. I'm going to mention Gottman again because he did the majority of the research in this topic. He suggested that withdrawal may lead to the deterioration of marriages over the long term, perhaps because problems are left unresolved and there is increased distance and alienation. So if you feel you are withdrawing, ask yourself, do I need time and space to process? Or am I closing myself off emotionally to the conversation? The answer to these questions are very important. If you are just saying, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to deal with it, all you're doing is pushing off the inevitable. because you think that, well, if I don't have to deal with the problem now, then the problem will go away. No, it won't. All you're doing is just pushing it out for another time and driving ultimately an emotional wedge between you and your spouse. So if you have a withdrawn type of conflict response, you really need to evaluate and ask yourself these deeper questions so that you are more aware and can respond appropriately to the needs of your relationship. If you are just a person and you're saying like, I just need time to think, that's fine. Continue to do that and, have that conversation with your spouse. But if you know that you're just shutting yourself down, please, please, please be aware that this is serious and that you need to address that issue. Like, why you're doing that? How do I resolve this? How do I make this better? The final quote of the episode is by someone who's anonymous, but I thought it was so great. They said, the goal of resolving conflict in a relationship is not victory or defeat. It's reaching understanding and letting go of our need to be right. That was deep. So that is all that I have for you lovely people for our first episode of season 2. If you haven't yet, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Black Marriage Therapy. Thanks again for listening, and I will catch you guys in the next episode.